Can I invite now the moderator of the panel, Manuel Barange, to come here to the tribune, and also to the panelists, Liana McManus, please, Martin Bisbeck, Mike Roman, and Patricia Bernal. So today we are going to have a very good panel, the future of large international programs in support of new ocean science and lessons learned from past programs. As we have said yesterday, many of the recent advances in ocean science are the results of large-scale international coordinated research projects. And everybody knows Manuel Barange. He was the director of GLOBEC. He was then the director also of the ocean science in the International Council of the Exploration of the Sea. He is actually the deputy director of Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and also in Plymouth Marine Laboratory he is the scientific director. So we have a great moderator, and I expect to be provocative. I am really interested in the outcome of this panel. So, Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis, and welcome everyone. Thank you for staying after such a great talk. Can I have the first presentation of the session? We have two presentations for you, and it's going to be pretty much a discussion. So we are going to limit the presentation's elements and make sure that you have a lot of things to say and to question. And I will start with the introduction, and then we'll have a presentation with statements from the panelists before you get onto the questions. Right, can I have the presentation up again? Yes. My name is Manuel Barange. I'm a Director of Science at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory. And I'm here for, I guess, two main reasons. I ran the International GLOBEC program for 10 years, an international program run in 29 different countries. And 4 years after that, I was in charge of the science of ICES, the International Council of the Exploration of the Sea. So international science has been what I've done for many, many years. My research is on climate change impacts on marine ecosystems, and particularly fisheries and food security elements in relation to that. But I won't talk about science today, or my science as such. This is the title of the panel. I will introduce your panelists first of all, very briefly. The first one is Mike Roman, who you've seen already today and yesterday and probably tomorrow, as he's very involved in the organization of this conference. So Mike is from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. He was involved in the JGOVS program, the Joint Global Ocean Flux Study. He served in a number of committees, including the U.S. National Academy of Sciences Committee to review major U.S. global ocean research programs, served as vice chair of the IWP IMBA program, and he'll talk about you later on that, past president of the Oceanographic Society, and member of a number of workshops to organize North Atlantic Arctic planning cooperation between Europe and the US. Your second panelist is Martin Fisbeck. Here it is. As physical oceanographer interested in the role of ocean in climate. He's co-chair of the WCRP. I'm sorry, but this is going to be a presentation with lots of acronyms, so I'll try to introduce them to you. The World Climate Research Program, CLIVA program. CLIVA stands for Climate Variability. He's very engaged in the Global Carbon Observing System, JCOVS, and GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System. Was part of a transition team that led to a new program called Future Earth, which we'll also introduce later on. And that justifies his presence in this panel. The third one is Liana McManus, originally from the Philippines. She's a project manager of the UN Environment Program Global Environmental Facility Transboundary Waters Assessment Program, was a member and then a chair of the Lloyd's Scientific Steering Committee. Lloyd's stands for Land-Ocean Interaction in the Coastal Zone, another international research program. Co-chair of the International Global Observing System, IGOS, involved in the GEO, the Global Earth Observations, I think it is, network, Coastal Zone Community of Practice, and has a number of other appointments. And finally, Patricia Bernal, originally from Chile, who is an advisor and coordinator of the IUCN, the Conservation Organization, on High Seas Biodiversity Initiative's global marine and polar programs. Has had a number of very important positions, from professorial appointments to ministerial appointments in Chile, and he was the past executive secretary of the IORC at UNESCO in Paris. So you can see it's a fantastic panel that I have the honor of moderating today. A very brief history of time when it comes to international science. In 1931, the International Council for Science, as it's called now, ICSU, was created to try to coordinate or provide a body to align the wishes of academic institutions in the different countries of the world. And ICSU in the late 1950s, as a result of one of the geophysical years, created SCORE, the Scientific Committee on Oceanic Research, and SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, both of which have been, in different ways, very involved in spinning off a number of international research programs. Incidentally, it's a different process. The Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO was created in 1960. So you can see that these structures that coordinate international science have been only in operation for about half a century. It's not really something that has happened for a long time. And as well, incidentally, those structures were created much later than the oldest marine science coordinated organization, ICES, which was created in 1902, and that continues to operate up to now. Now, from this group of international organizations emerged what I will call the global programs. So those are the programs that emerged as a result of the challenge of global environmental change in the 1980s and beginning of the 1990s. And the four big programs were the IGBP, the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, so originally very rooted on the natural sciences, the WCRP, World Climate Research Program, working on climate in the 1980s, Diversitas, for once an acronym that you know what it means, and the IHDP, which is the International Human Dimensions Program. That was really the social sciences at work. You can see all of these appearing in the late 80s, early 90s. And from there, a number of core projects were generated. Some of those projects had a very clear remit, a beginning and an end. And I'll put them in a graph here. I will not put all of them because there are too many, but perhaps the major ones from a perspective of the oceans and seas. So WOCE, the World Ocean Circulation Experiment. I once heard it referred to as the worst oceanographic cock-up ever. But apologies for that. Ran for a decade or so in the 1990s, and when it completed its work, it closed down. JGOVS, the Joint Global Ocean Flux Study, so a biochemistry study, was set up in 1990 or 89 and ran until early 2000s and then closed down. GLOBEC, the Global Ocean Ecosystem Dynamics Program, again with a beginning and an end. Normally, or for a number of countries, those projects were linked to national projects funded. In other words, there was an international operation, but every country that was part of it had a funded activity. Then there are a number of other projects, which are listed here in this green, that started at different times. GeoHub on harmful algal blooms, LOITS on the land-ocean interaction in the coastal zone, IMBA and biochemistry and ecosystems, CLIVA, climate variability, GeoX, which is about the hydrological cycles, SOLAS, which is surface oceans lower atmosphere interaction, and GOOSE, the Global Ocean Observing System. Those are projects that started and have continued since. And my first contentious point that I'm very happy to have it contested is that some of these projects have become networks. In other words, they are not so much coordinating research on the ground, but rather provide an element for discussion at a number of opportunities. So the nature of these programs perhaps has evolved a little bit from making sure that we have significant research that is useful and is needed to get the overarching questions based on research done in different countries, to networks where people come and discuss how their own individual work fits with an overall framework. Many of these programs are evolving into what is called the Future Earth program, a new international program on ocean, on global sustainability. It's not just ocean. Now, I would argue that the global programs really work well to change the landscape of science. So what you see here is a slide of the number of publications that have the titles Climate Change and Sea or Climate Change and Ocean, based on Web of Science in 5-year chunks. And you can see that from the 1990s, early 1990s, where the global programs were created, the publication rate of climate change and oceans really has increased. So one could argue that those programs really changed that community, our community. But Future Earth is about sustainability. And if you look at a similar figure, words sustainability and sea or sustainability and ocean in research papers over the 5-year chunks, you have this profile. If you put it in the same y-axis than the previous slide, you get this. So, sustainability and oceans is not something that appears in the literature a lot. And I'm surprised. I was surprised when I did this. And now this comes from Web of Science. It's not Google Scholar or any of these perhaps more dubious ways of getting statistics. But this is Web of Science. So if perhaps Future Earth, if it is successful, you would expect an increase in this profile in the next few decades. Future Earth has about 25 different projects. This is the list that I got yesterday, as Martin Visbeck told me that there was not enough in my presentation about Future Earth. And the one thing that I'll say, another contentious, is that of these 25 projects, 23 of them were already in place before Future Earth was even a twinkle in anybody's eye. Now, what does that tell you? And that's what I've sometimes referred to as the Russian doll syndrome. There's different interpretations of that syndrome, but in this context, what I mean is that we are very good at creating something to put something inside. And rather than stop something else, you just create a new one and just put that overall that you had, everything that you had inside. Is that helping us in terms of moving forward, or is that a hindrance to our development in terms of international research programs? I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just going to tell you what we're going to do now in this panel. We're going to try to respond to 3 questions. Are the drivers behind past international programming initiatives still applicable? Do the new generation of international initiatives have different objectives and goals, and if so, why? Is there a future for international science, or is it all science in the modern era international or global by definition? We will have now statements from the panelists. I'm going to give them about 8 minutes each to make their case, and I will try to beep something so that they know that the time is up on these 3 issues. And then we will have an open microphone for the audience to question the panelists or their statements or my statements and make your own views. And then if we have time, I will ask the panelists to give their closing statements. And what we're going to try to do is make sure that we capture as much as possible of this discussion, because IORC, the organizers, were very keen to try to make sure that we have some lessons and some messages to put through in future program initiatives. So with that, I'll stop. If you could perhaps load the second presentation. And I will have then the first panelist. I've put all the presentations of the panelists in one single presentation, so they will be easy for them to move through. Now that's the first one. So the second presentation is labeled number 2. Should be reasonably easy to find. No? There's another one. No, there's another presentation. We've done with this one. Fantastic. Thank you. So, Mike, you're first. If you want to do it from there or from here, that's up to you.
Oh, there's no crowd. Sure, I'll just do it from here. Okay. So first of all, as one has the tendency to do with this myriad of acronyms. I'm trying not to use any, but if I use an acronym that you don't know, raise your hand, and then I will spell it out for you. So what I was going to do following these topic questions is just throw some discussion points in my view of some of these things. And if you, have a question or don't like something that I say or want to expound on it, just you'll have to take a note because you'll get a chance to bring that up later. And so after this slide, I'm going to go over briefly the IMBER example, which is kind of a case study for one of these network programs, and then talk about a potential new program. So motivation, history, lessons learned from the global change programs, the glory years. I was involved in GLOBAC from the beginning, JGOFs, besides WOS, there was another program, RIDGE. These programs really had true international participation. When you were out in the North Atlantic Bloom experiment, we worked with German scientists, with English scientists. When we worked in the Pacific, we worked with Australian scientists. We worked with French scientists. So you were coordinating ship operations, you were coordinating experiments, you had core measurements and methods so that different countries on different ships used the same type of methods, and you really got a comprehensive view of the ocean. And I think when this happened, it was, as I was a bit younger scientist then, it was a wonderful experience. And so the natural tendency is when these things ended, as Manuel said, at least in the United States after JGOFs, we had a number of workshops and we wanted to continue. We wanted to continue with JGOFs. We wanted to continue with GLOBAC. But our National Science Foundation pulled the plug. They said, that's enough. And there was a negative reaction by many US scientists to say, well, this was kind of an insider program. Before we commit all this money again, we want you to write your papers. And so the pendulum had swung one way where there were a lot of these international programs, and then it swung the other way. And by the way, this wasn't the first series. There was something called the International Decade of Ocean Exploration, and that was another international program. And we had the Polar Year. So don't think that these global change programs were the first time there was this international cooperation. So what were some of the reasons why at least the US participation in these global programs stopped? Well, we had a recession. In 2001, the stock market went down after we had some terrorist activities. Funding was cut by the National Science Foundation, other programs, and it was more attention to national programs. And also, there was our own scientists in these programs and others were pushing for observing systems, both within the US and as global partners. And so, as the funding agencies were beginning to grapple with this, they were keeping in mind that they would have to put resources that went into some of these global programs into building infrastructure for some of these global observing systems. Now, since then, we've had some strong collaborations. We had a wonderful presentation by Sam DuPont. I'm not sure that we had, right from the get-go, an international program in ocean acidification as people began to become aware, like Dick Feely and other folks in the United States in ocean acidification. They started to put in proposals, and a lot of our system is driven by bottom-up peer activity. And so US scientists from around the world realized that ocean acidification is something that we could address, had to address. And so by putting in proposals, our funding agencies responded. And then scientists from different countries began to talk at international meetings. And so, as Sam said, now there's monitoring, coordinated monitoring efforts, coordinated programs in Europe. We have in the United States a coordinated national program of ocean acidification between our NSF, NOAA, and EPA and others. And so this is a good example of kind of a bottom-up program. And then if there is such a thing as coming back in the afterlife, I want to come back as a physical oceanographer. Because it's always my perception that it's easier to get money, But B, while the biologists and biogeochemists always scramble for getting these programs, the physical oceanographers always seem to do it. So in this time when we haven't had a lot of these international JGOFs, we've had Argo, we've had CLIVAR, we've had other international physical programs that have continued the whole way along. And then lastly, am I about up to my 8 minutes yet?
Well, I was going to tell you that I'm going to be rude. You've used half of your statement already.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to go. Anyway, the future of programs, as you've seen, is these programs that have social science. So I was involved in the start of IMBER, and this was not the original vision statement that we had. So this consequent effects on the Earth system and human society, we had some vague language about this, but it was only when the GLOBIC program folded, and then you see with a little 2010 that we rewrote our science plan to take on the GLOBEC programs of ESOS, CLEOTOP, and I forgot there was a third one, we had a human dimensions workshop group, but we never did anything until we brought in the GLOBEC people. And you see the timeline of IMBER. Now in 2014, we had our first Open Science Conference, but this is an example not of a JGOF or GLOBEC model, but of this kind of glue program. We have workshops every other year called MBIZO. We run summer programs for early career scientists. So IMBER doesn't have like 5 nations going out to the same place. It's more of a networking program for folks.
You're federating programs.
Yes, we're facilitating programs. All right, so last in my 2 minutes, this is very different than this kind of bottom-up program that is possibly getting off the ground between the Canada, the US, and EU. As Peter Wiebe knows, after GLOBEC, he tried very hard to get involved, a US program involved with Basin. But it was only after this EU Joint Commission met in February 2003, and they focused on collaboration in a lot of things that we as scientists don't normally think about, creating jobs, shared challenges, food security. And so this effort between the EU and US talked about a lot of collaborations, one of which was working in the North Atlantic. And so in May 2013, the Galway Statement was signed by officials from the US, Canada, and EU to join in joint collaborative work, all right, to better understand the Atlantic Ocean, where we realized through the conveyor belt prediction, changing biogeographic distributions of commercially important fish, that it was best for the US, Canada, and EU to collaborate on some future research. And there was next plays, the Euro Basin had existed and was ending, and then they're planning the next phase, and our National Science Foundation expressed an interest in collaborating with the EU on a joint effort. And so they proposed to develop a workshop, and you noticed in the bottom, it isn't just OCB, which is kind of a coordinating science effort in the United States, and Eurobasins, but it also has the European Commission and NSF. So this, from the get-go, was backed by the science foundations. And so we had a workshop in February, which some members of the organizing workshop committee are here. An announcement of opportunity for funding will come out by our National Science Foundation in the next month. There will be a follow-up to Eurobasin. There will be announcements of funding opportunities in Canada for this broad study that has the word sustainability, working with people that have to adapt to climate change in their fishing habits where they live, but also understanding the changes in currents, transport, biogeochemical processes. Is very broad, but the study domain is portrayed in that diagram. So this is a thing very much looking forward, and I will end with the buzzer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, and apologies for the alarm, but I think it's important to try to keep everyone to time. Next one is Martin Bisbeck.
Okay, so welcome all, and it's my pleasure to discuss with you that important subject. And I'm just want to take a look at international ocean science from a bit of a higher level perspective. I'll maybe at the end say a word about CLIVAR. And I think, well, what does it take to actually encourage the nations around the globe to engage in international global science? And I think you've got to ask yourself a question, well, what is the problems which are best addressed by international coordinated science? And I would say the answer is quite simple. It's those problems that no single nation or region can solve. When we started WOS and JGOVs, getting access to the ocean, understanding its circulation was something that no nation could afford to do. And it was clear we're either going to do it together or it's not going to happen. So the question today is that as our capabilities have grown, and some people think international programming is all about telling everybody what you like to do, but I think it's all about looking out and say, what are the big things that we can only do together, where I want to be a part of? So the question in today's world is it really only a network of scientists, Manuel, as you're saying, or are there things out there that are big enough to capture our imagination that we really want to work on this together? And that then gets programs going and gets programs to be effective. I think Sam gave a good overview on two things I'm going to talk a little bit about. Understanding the future of the ocean. That is not easy. That is a complex undertaking, and ocean acidification is just one angle of that. And it is very complex in its own right. So I cannot fathom how even the richest nation on our planet can do that. That we have to do together. At the same time, things have happened since WOS and JGOVs that there is an understanding that the ocean is more important to our day-to-day decisions, and nations around the world are asking for information for their daily decision-making on oceans. That is a new thing in some ways that wasn't so much present 30 years ago. So we're also asked to produce timely information to decision-making on a more ongoing basis. That is a different agenda. That is not just science, that's a different partnership. Let me give you some background on this. So I play these days quite a bit in the area of sustainable development, and many of you might remember the old sustainability triangle, which I have here. But I'm going to actually try to modernize that. And I love this conference title, One Planet, One Ocean. And I think studies like the one of you on Workstrom remind us we only have one ocean to do all the things with that we enjoy from the ocean. It's finite. 50 years ago, people thought the ocean was so big you can do whatever you want. It's sort of going to deal with it. I think we've realized this is a finite ocean. Where are the boundaries? We also realized that we want food, water, transport, energy, many things from it. So it's this concept of a safe operating space that is really a hard thing to define. You know, is it possible with 9 billion people on the planet to live in what's called a safe and sustainable operating space? So I'm going to take these two sort of visuals and oceanize them. So the way we think about sustainability, at least some of us, is a bit like that. We're moving away from the triangle, say these are connected spheres. So what are the spheres? Ocean as a life support system. It provides oxygen, food, biodiversity, or ecosystem function, if we want to say so. It provides us climate stability. And last but not least, a sense of place. We go to the beach because we enjoy looking over the ocean in Barcelona. That's nothing physical, that's nothing tangible, but it's still, that's why people like to go to the beaches. So they like to care for the ocean for that. So a life support system. Blue economy, if you live in Europe and in the US, this is a big buzzword, and I hope it's not meant as, well, let's wreck the last resources we have and extract as much as we can to secure growth. I think it is about income markets, gainful jobs, technology, and investments, but it is about sustainability of that. How can we use the ocean in new ways and more sustainable ways to feed the people that we want to feed, maybe even more, extract energy from the ocean in a sustainable way. Coastal communities are looking for jobs in the ocean. That's what they think about the economic side, the blue economy. And again, defining that, what does that mean, is not by no means easy. And yes, Manuel, there are not so many publications on that. I wish there were more. And then this issue on ocean societies that I think a lot of us are interested in, it starts with equity. Equitable access to coastal and the ocean itself is by no means guaranteed, and we think there's a big challenge around that. It's about quality of life in a deterring environment. Coastal communities feel that in a big way. That all the changes that Sam talked to us about mean a direct impact on quality of life for coastal communities. We need to recognize the diversity of cultures. Certain things that resonate with us in Europe or North America might not resonate at all with Asians or Africans, and that has to do with science programming, but also with aspirations that we're setting. And I do think institutions and governance is a big challenge for the ocean. The ocean is very fragmented from a governmental point of view. You have coastal states, you have areas beyond national jurisdiction, you have the area at the seafloor, you have all these legal regimes interacting with them, we have to go for permits for do our research. It's complex. And yet we think they're not efficient to implement marine protected areas to control the fisheries. So there's a whole challenge around these. So what programs like the ones that I think could drive us into the future is try to bring these strands of sustainability together. And this is hard science. And it takes the best minds around the globe and a lot of resources to do this in an integrated way. And I think the new programs out there might want to capture that. Now, personally, I do a lot of work that I do in the World Climate Research Program. And here you see my take on it, Manuel, which is similar to yours. The only one difference is that GVEX, the Global Water Cycle Experiment, CLIVAR, the Climate Variability and Predictability Program, I say a word about, CLIC is the Cryospheric Program, and SPARC is the Stratospheric Program. All of these will, from a political statement, not merge into Future Earth. The World Climate Research Program will stay there, but it's going to be a very strong partner with Future Earth. So the same things that we're discussing here is important for the World Climate Research Program. And CLIVAR, just like we just seen from the sort of programmatic statement from IMBER, it also has changed a bit its notion. It's the Ocean and Climate Program, variability, predictability, and change, but you also see some mentioning on things like society. Now, what's exciting in CLIVAR is we still try to have research foci asking questions like, what will ENSO do in the future world? How do upwelling systems will evolve as climate is changing? And here we're looking at the physical side, the chemical side, and the ecosystem side. So you see some areas in these programs where connectivity is built up. These are we doing together with IMBER and SOLAS. But I think we're all trying to engage our communities in deep science, meaning specialized things. Ocean mixing is a big topic that we try to organize globally. And then we're also trying to advance the integrated science level. And I think this balance act between drilling down deep in ocean acidification or climate science or ocean mixing, and at the same time trying to respond to these societal questions. How can we imagine a world that is going to support 9 billion people in the future? But I want to see international programming more in the visionary statement. What is the ocean of the future that we want? How is it going to look like? How are we going to deal with these challenges in a positive way, Sam, as you were saying? We are asked to do that. And I don't think it's about negative measuring all the things we're not allowed to do. There's a lot of things we can do with the ocean and coast to make it a livable space, a visionary space, and I think a lot of great science can be done to support that vision. I think that's what should be motivating us for global programming, is to look at the aspirational goals, try to see what is the future of the ocean, what do we want it to be, and what is science to offer with this. I think we should have an aspirational goal, and I do think it's a hard scientific problem which will encourage global communication, global collaboration. And the last sentence, you can ask me the questions about this. I'm very, very happy that we're going to have a sustainable development goal focused on oceans. That was not an easy thing to get into the agenda, but I think it's a great opportunity for the global scientific community to support that with the right science saying, well, what is it going to look like, a sustainable ocean in the future, and what do we need to do in our countries to develop towards that? Thank you, Manuel. Oh, I'm 10 seconds short. Wonderful.
Thank you. Can you just, I think...
Click one more. I think that was my last slide. Oh, it wasn't the last slide, but keep going. That's fine.
All right. Thank you. Next one will be Liana McManus.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Manuel, and the organizers, Luis, for inviting me to be part of this august panel. I'd like to take a step back and perhaps devote some time on conceptual underpinnings, which probably is the challenge as well as a source for how we move forward with ocean science research. I'd like to take a positive spin about Matryoshka dolls. They're my favorite play instrument, if you wish, toys. Matryoshka dolls, beginning the 1890s, was an attempt perhaps to entertain children, but also to show them that there's identity as you go from last to last. The natural system is very much nested like Matryoshka dolls. You have emergent properties that one can only see at each level of organization. For example, as you go from the population level, you have density. At the community level, you have species diversity. And at the ecosystem level, you begin to see energy flows. None of those emergent properties are evident at the lower scale, and that's why they're called emergent properties. And I think the Matryoshka doll shows this in a very vivid way. We've come a long way in ocean research, in studies of scales and nestedness. I would argue that in human systems, there are nested properties, but perhaps the dominant features are non-nested. And the reason why the human system has both nested and non-nested properties is because we are reflexive, we think. There may be other beings out there that also are reflexive. We don't know. That's the field of astrobiology. But the reflexive nature underpins, or is the major challenge, bane if you wish, but it's also the source of mitigation, adaptation, and learning. I would argue that international ocean research has to come to grasp with non-nested features of the human system if it wants to move forward. Some of the issues that have been mentioned, the buzzwords such as access, equity, these are non-linear, non-nested properties of human institutions. I would argue that international ocean research would require scaling through the Matryoshka lasts. If one were to take a cross-section and put sort of like the traditional way that we put the lasts together, we have local, national, and global lasts into any scientific or international ocean research framework. There has to be a way to scale across those lasts in a more efficient manner, given that resources are dwindling. And I say that both from an economic standpoint, we have recession, but also because of the reality that human populations are increasing on a finite Earth. And that means that per capita, resources are indeed profoundly limiting. If you look closer into a last, there is the ecosystem and human interactions, the social ecological gears, as I would call it. The ecosystem gear tends to be of a slow type of movement. Okay? Human systems are fast-moving systems. Okay? Now, if you wish, in an ideal state, if both gears were on the same time frame, we will probably have less of a problem. But in a world of fast and slow variables moving like gears, you do have a more complex system of trying to make the movements more synchronous in time. I would argue that an international ocean framework, in order to be successful, must have national and local partners that deal with the inner lasts, and international and regional partners that deal with the outer or global last. Manuel has mentioned that in the early days, there were national subscriptions to international ocean programs, very well coordinated and perhaps sufficiently funded. I think that the reflexive scaling across lasts has to become very evident and very much so explicit in both the science policy at all scales. I would also argue that there are comparative advantages in targeted work between international and national partners. For example, in understanding emergent and cross-scale properties of the ocean system, both natural and human components of it, perhaps the nested properties is best communicated by an international program, but there has to be an explicit partnership that deals with cross-scale properties and non-nested aspects of it, mainly the human systems. There has to be a way to model the ocean system where scenarios of convergent and divergent timeframes are explicit scenarios. At the national and local scale, perhaps our partners can deal with evaluating socioeconomic and ecological consequences where the timeframes or perspectives of time converge and diverge. I think both empirical and modeling studies can be very efficiently done within a national domain. I like the promotion of open data exchange. There is now big data because of how much we get from satellites and in situ ocean observing systems. I think the operational products coming out of these instruments should be so packaged that they are quite easy to assimilate in small scale or fine scale models that are probably done best by national and local partners. I think that the idea of having SDG targets, Sustainable Development Goal targets, is an explicit way to deal with societal demands and needs, but that has to be done in a very coordinated and targeted fashion. As I said, approximating ocean behavior under SDG scenarios may be best done by international ocean programs, but there has to be a directed partnership that deals with socioeconomic and ecological states at the national and local levels. And I'll end with that.
Thank you very much, Liana. We'll have then the last statement from Patricia Bernal. Let me just help you with the first slide. There you
are. Oops. Okay, I think you can see that. I did put most, not all, but most of the acronyms that probably many of you will have never read or seen. And I chose to display them on a two-axis coordinate system that on the bottom we do have spatial scale of oceanic processes, and on the vertical scale I put an axis that goes from little science to big science. And I want to say first that I believe that in a certain way, because of the audience, I want to retrench back a little bit to inside the domain of ocean sciences, because I certainly do understand that when we move from ocean sciences towards the science of human ecological systems, we are walking a difficult road where not all the people in the community will be ready to accompany us. So let's deal with the subject that we were supposed to be talking about, international programs. In the past, we have really at least 3 or 4 really large, big science international programs. And the first one was, I would say you mentioned it, the International Geophysical Year in 1957-58. That was a huge program that was essentially geophysics. It was so large that just the annual budget for the US National Science Foundation budget to manage the US contribution to this program was equivalent to all the rest of the NSF budget. So it was the NSF budget plus the budget that was attributed to the International Geophysical Year. We don't have programs like that, of that size today at all. And I said this because the follow-up of that was what next after the geophysical year? And the oceanography wasn't a big component of the International Geophysical Year. So SCORE and IOC were created to push oceanography out of the geophysical year into benefiting from this. And they decided the consensus was probably there was a big opportunity in the Indian Ocean because it was the least known basin. It was driven by monsoonal systems, so probably there, by shifting monsoons, you will be able to look a lot on the circulation hypothesis of the time. And we knew that Asia, a much more populated part of the world, probably could benefit a lot of knowing more about the living marine resources. So everybody agree on a I would say, a very high level, almost political consensus that probably was a good idea to invest into the Indian Ocean expedition. That was a 33 ships expedition, coordinated very, in a complex matrix of coordination. And indeed, it moved oceanography in the Indian Ocean to a new level. And the third large program I want to refer to is the International Ocean Decade of Exploration. International Decade of Ocean Exploration. It was a 10-year program, and this was originally a USA program alone, but it was multidisciplinary, included physical oceanography, chemical oceanography, living marine resources. One part of that was quite international, the QEA, the Coastal Upwelling experiment program. And we went with ships from different nations to the major upwelling centers. We started, of course, with Oregon, California, then we moved to Africa, Benguela, we moved to the Canary system, and then to Peru and Chile. And we learned a lot. That really brought together physical oceanographers, chemical oceanographers, and biological oceanographers together. Because there is a big difference with what Mike said on international programs. Why is it that physical oceanography gets it much easier to organize a program? Because you do share a common base, theoretical base that comes from Newton, essentially, classical physics. And you don't have a major problem identifying which are the gaps in the knowledge building that you need to tackle with observational efforts. So this is easily done, much more easily done in geophysics and physics than in biology. In biology, you really have to stitch together different pieces and different pieces of theory, different group of practice, different smaller communities that don't talk easily to each other. And you, at the most, you federate efforts that are international in character, but that are not addressing the major next question coming out of the gaps in the progress of science. I think these large programs evolved into this cloud of different programs. In chemistry, we have GeoSex. GeoSex is interesting because it was, Stommel who suggested to the chemical oceanographers, say, why is it that you do, guys, only single stations? You should be really doing, sections, of geochemical measurements. And, he said to a couple of very major chemical oceanographers, to Wally Broker and Goldberg, yes. And they took the challenge, and they said, but the problem, Hank, is that to do a section, we will spend probably all the money of NSF doing it. But they went forward, and they got GeoSex. So the first time they did scale up, the effort of observational effort was done through these major programs. The big science, little science axis is complicated. I put there the human genome because that's what I would call little science expanded to big science, because little science can be done at the scale of a laboratory. And it's easy because at the end, science is done by individuals. It's not done by committees. When you organize an international program, oceanographic program, even in physical oceanography, you have to make compromises. You have to develop a consensus among participating researchers concerning investigative strategies and plans. And therefore, you don't have your own view and your own idea implemented. You have to compromise. And this is not everybody is really ready to compromise. You compromise much less if you just have to use a ultra centrifuge 20 years ago, and if you do have a sequencer in your lab, you do what you want to do next with your sequencer, and you use it for that purpose. So this is small scale, one laboratory, one individual, one group of individuals, one institution. This is a small. But if you scale up at that level, you move up. You can have the scale of complexity of solving the human genome. But in the main axis of this graph, you do have the different scales from local to regional, as Liana was mentioning, and then you go to the large scale, at least basin-wide research that can be or needs to be organized internationally. I would submit to you that what we have been suffering lately with international programs are these two things, that some of those are federation of different initiatives that are not really following a single hypothesis-driven questioning. And the second thing is that somehow some of those are being probably too much driven by I would say, the top-down approach coming from, let's say, our stakeholders in the sense of societal stakeholders downward. And I believe that the successful international progress needs to be built by scientists, meaning essentially scientists having to come together to build a consensus, and that doesn't happen easily at the international level. So if you want to really bring bear to fruit the properties of oceanography that is essentially a global type of science, I think we need to really come up with this mechanism. How do we build up bottom-up consensus on the next science questions at the international level to build a bona fide international program? Thank you.
Thank you, Patricio, and all the rest of the panelists for their statements. We're going to open now for your interventions. But before I do that, I'm just going to pick up 5 things that I have selected from the statements for you to consider. The first one is perhaps that the original programs were driven by the questions that we don't know this, and we need to do this together to get the answer. And perhaps the future international programs need to be driven by the what do we do about, so more the challenge rather than the question driven. And in so doing, we have to take consideration, as Liana mentioned, that the natural systems tend to operate at a slower pace of change compared to the human systems. And therefore, if we design programs that require natural and social interactions, we need to consider that the speed of change is different. The third one, coming from Martin, is this mention that resonates with the fact that this international program is to be driven by visionary statements, by aspirational goals rather than just pure scientific questions. It was mentioned as well that in going from this A to Z, we're actually somewhere in between, and some of these international programs have evolved from coordinated activities to essentially federated programs, and that has its own dynamics. Fifth one, perhaps more contentious, is that I would argue that what we call international programs in the past were essentially Western science-driven initiatives. They were driven by the Western world and not necessarily responding to the aspirations and the challenges and the visions of other parts of the world, and that's something that we need to consider as we move forward. And then finally, how to move forward without too much baggage from existing initiatives. So the negative side of Matryoshka dolls. I remember when my children were still little. Once I went to an exhibition of art from 6 years old, and it was fantastic. And I asked the teacher, "How did you manage to make them concentrate to make so much good art at 6?" And she said, "It's very easy. You just have to take the page out when the time is right." And perhaps we're not very good at doing that. So with that, I'll just open up to questions. And please introduce yourself. And if you have a question for a particular panelist, please say so we can direct the question. If it's just a statement, say so as well. You're also welcome to do that. Peter first.
Hi, I'm Peter Wiebe from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I actually have a kind of a statement first and maybe then a question. It's really important what Martin said, that in fact international programs have to have problems that can't be solved by any particular nation. And I think there are many of them from the world ocean point of view. The second thing, though, that's required in order to get international collaboration and coordination is to have the governments themselves actually coordinating and cooperating. And I don't see yet any way forward for really big programs that are coordinated on an international basis if the actual governments don't collaboratively call for proposals on particular topics, collaboratively address the evaluation of the proposals that are jointly prepared by the scientists from many nations, and then decide how the funding is going to be collaboratively. And what you see for the North Atlantic program that's just now being formulated by the Galway enterprise is not collaboration at the government levels. They say yes, but they're not doing it. The European Union is going forward with proposals from the Europeans. The North Americans are following in their footsteps, but behind the times. None of the proposals are going to be addressed jointly or funded jointly. Even the US proposals are going to go into the core call. There is no money set aside. So until we actually get governments to coordinate, these big programs are doomed to have a piecemeal approach to the problems.
Thank you. I think there's more a statement than a question, so that's, I'm going to leave it at that. I've got a couple of questions over there, and then I'll move to your side again. Yep.
Good morning. My name is Paulo Nunes from the World Bank, WAVES Global Partnership. I'd like to ask, first of all, congratulate you and the panelists for the very interesting talks. I'd like to ask your sentiment about the spontaneous bloom of international projects that eventually are becoming initiatives and networks. And my question is the following: how would you think about moving forward? Do we need something to coordinate all these different actors in an articulate way? And how can we be more inclusive, as you all said, to move away from this, let's say, hegemony from Europe and US, and bringing forward colleagues from the Oceania and from Indian Ocean and from Pacific, etc. So about a meta, if it is necessary for a meta organization, how can we bring these partners all together? And I thank you.
Any panelists that would like to answer that question, apart from just creating another Russian doll? Yes, Martin.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I thank you for that. And I think it's something that we all wrestle with. So I think certainly this is what keeps us in the back of the mind. And I think Manuel gave one answer, which was implied a bit by your question. Maybe we need a body that coordinates everything. Well, I think we have too many. The problem that we have in the ocean community, we have too many coordinating bodies by now that all think they have a piece in the ocean, and it's the tendency to say, let's generate the next one, right? That coordinates all of those, and I wonder, and I think Manuel has mentioned that a little bit, at some point there should be a bit more consolidation. It makes it a bit more easier to understand, what is the ocean community, who do they communicate to, how do you communicate with the ocean community if you're not within. So I take your question a little bit as a challenge. Can we sort of collapse a bit, into a more stronger, more effective organization? But the diversity that we have is great in the ocean, but sometimes not as efficient. But that's easy said. The solution space is very difficult.
Thank you. Patricia next, and I've got, you can prepare for a question at the back there. Yeah.
Just a comment on that. I think we lost one mechanism that we had in the past. True, the community was much smaller at the time, but we used to have every 4 or 5 years what we call the Joint Oceanographic Assembly. Remember, the last one was done in Acapulco in 1988. And one of the ones were when we inaugurated the deep tank in Dalhousie. That was a Joint Oceanographic Assembly event. So this meeting was an international gathering of all the international unions of science involved in ocean research, And they having their own meeting during the week, but at the end, 2 days were the Joint Oceanographic Assembly, where we really tried to coalesce the common ideas and the common challenges, the next steps. We lost that, and now you do have very large meetings, academic meeting. I'm thinking of the Geophysical Society meeting of America, but that's the only equivalent of a large meeting. But it's a typical science meeting. It's not this idea of federating, bringing the social issues, bringing the human aspect. We should think of something like that. We need to revitalize that. I mean, somehow that is lacking. We don't have mechanisms for doing that today.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here, yes.
That's over here. Thank you. We have one question over there, and then I'll move on this side.
Wendy Watson-Wright with the IOC, and thanks to all the panelists. I guess my first question is largely to Martin, but for anybody to answer. We've all mentioned Future Earth. Some of us know a fair amount about it, some of us don't. So I wondered if you could just very briefly describe it, but then also say, how is the ocean science community going to work into Future Earth, and what should participants here be thinking about in terms of ensuring that Future Earth works and that it's just not an add-on to all the multiplicity of ocean research programs we have? And then in the larger context, how does that fit with what we hope will be a standalone sustainable development goal in the ocean?
Wendy, great to have you here in the audience. A wonderful question, and let me just state a few things here. I was part of the transition team, meaning there was a group of people, quite broad, a few scientists, a few stakeholders, trying to think about what a new, more integrated global research program on sustainability should look like. And so it was a fascinating 2 years where we discussed and debated that. The one thing we didn't do, that was what was in the title, to define the transition. How we go from the existing global environmental change program to the new Future Earth 1. And this is now unfortunately playing out a bit, that the transition is happening as we're launching it. And I think Manuel commented on this. Certainly there's existing activities under the global environmental change programs which are valuable, which are producing wonderful globally coordinated science. Some of them are a bit more networks, but many of them are very active and producing wonderful results. So I think Future Earth wanted to make sure that that existing level of activity doesn't get lost. So you look at the website, you see all of these acronyms listed, and you say, well, where's the new thing? Where's the aspirational new programs? And I think they're a little slow on that. And I think that's not a good thing. I wish that was managed a bit differently. So then that means if you ask the question, so where's forest under Future Earth? Or where's ocean under Future Earth? Or where's the humanities? It's under development. And Wendy knows this. We're trying to get all of these acronyms that we just heard over the last half hour, the ocean programs from the Global Environmental Change family, to actually meet together. Patricio, not in a big symposium, but actually with the scientific leads, and try to do powwow a little bit about what our joint future should be in this evolving landscape, and where an ocean platform, say in Future Earth, is that something we want? But I'm saying, is it that something we want to be more effective in that arena? So we're trying to do some coordination with that. It'll happen in March, and I hope that the ocean community, if you like that idea, support your leaders on that, and that we can think a bit about the common space that we have across these programs and how we want to promote that, and maybe look at some of the missing bits, Patricia, as you mentioned, not in the equation sense, but in the sense of what do we need in the ocean for programs, and maybe use that in that new framework of sustainability science of Future Earth to help us with that. It's going to be very much needed to support the Sustainable Development Goal process, as you mentioned, the targets, because they're looking at the ocean community for input. And the question is, so where do you go? Do you go to the Oceanography Society? Do you go to IMBER? Do you go to CLIVAR? Do you talk to IOC? Do you talk to IOCCP? You can give many, many acronyms, or to FAO maybe UNEP. So I think we as the ocean community have to be a bit more better organized to define a space that people know where to ask the questions to, and if they need help, to say, okay, you talk to so-and-so. And I don't want to build a new organization, but somehow we have to get a federated system that is very clear for these challenges. Talk to Patricio.
I second that idea, not to talk to me, but the idea of reinforcing
You know what I mean.
the institution.
Thank you. Good, Jake first.
Yeah, Jake Rice from Canada. And I'd like to pose a question particularly to Leon, but all the panelists in the sense that in different ways, many of you said, today's research will be much more about sustainability, the human dimension added to what had been the natural. And whether the human dimension actually does turn faster than the ecological dimension. And I say that in the sense that the problems that we're challenged to solve about humanity certainly change at a faster rate. But I think we all took from the first plenary talk today, we know the solutions in the abstract, but to implement them is a matter of changing values and changing human choice. And I'm pretty old now. It's taken a full lifetime to see changes in values relative to gender and race in society. Values do not change in a fast cycle. It takes a long time to bring about those changes and a real understanding of motivation to do so. How does that fit into the research visions we have?
Great, thank you for that statement and a question, which is fine. I've got one question here, and then the gentleman behind you. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm Daud Hassan from University of Western Sydney, Australia. I'm just asking, we are talking about one ocean, one world. So all we know here that we have 16 regional seas, and we have different priorities and expectations from different parts of the world oceans. So I can see that there are lots of discussion and analysis in terms of Baltic, Northeast Atlantic, and North Sea, all this region. But for example, South Asian seas, there is not much development in that context, and certain parts of Africa as well. I'm just wondering that whether there is any initiative, any plan or program. There are some plans and programs from World Bank and other international programs point of view, but most of them are not effective in that context, that government perspective and all these things, and willingness of the government. But I'm just wondering that from this particular conference, whether any initiative in terms of integrated and sustainable development, for example, Bay of Bengal perspective, whether you have any vision from integrated ocean zone management. Anyone can just discuss that in this particular. Thanks.
Who would like to do it here?
Well, I would say that I am involved in the UN World Ocean Assessment that is going on right now. And there is a chapter where still we haven't finished that's called Marine Scientific Research. One point that was very strongly made by our colleagues from Africa, Asia, and many of the other developing nations was how is it that we can catch up with the rest of the world? And my answer to them in private was very clearly, you really need to build your science. Science needs to be built in each country. Scientists must be operating in each country, cannot be brought from outside. And that takes a lot, and it takes time. It takes not just education of individuals, but building up of institutions and changing the structure and mindsets of governments. So governments ask their own scientists questions to make their science meaningful for development. So it is a trying effort, and I have been involved in the last 20 years in trying to do this, particularly in Africa, and it's extremely difficult. There are so many obstacles to promote this inner development of science. But you should think of who is leading now oceanography, and there was a symposium in Southampton when they inaugurated the current National Center in Southampton, analyzing the legacy of the Challenger expedition. And at that time, you know, John Good summarized the next 20 years and said, you know, probably, you know, funding is going down in oceanography in the USA. It's not going down in Europe in the same way, he said. But in 20 years, probably you have to look at Asia and maybe to see what China is doing. And we certainly need to do that today.
Thank you. Martin, quick.
Well, on the specific question, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that. There's a number of people in the community thinking about what they call an Indian Ocean Expedition #2. And it's IOC and SCORE who are formally advocating for that, and I would encourage all of you to get interested in that. That is in your region of the world. But I will say the program as it stands is about going back with research vessels to do another round of Jacobs, Vos, geosecs. And I thought, Patricio mentioned that the first Indian Ocean expedition was about understanding the Indian Ocean as such. And the community has brought to bear everything they had, which was global research vessels. We're talking 50 years ago. And I hope that the Indian Ocean expedition or program, the new one, and you should help the community with that, will not just be about getting the rich countries to drive their ships around the Indian Ocean, but actually bring everything to bear that we have in marine science. That is models, remote sensing, planes, and ships, and also our much better understanding of the role of the ocean for society, how it affects coastal communities, your new ways to want to use the ocean. It could be a more integrated program, because it was an integrated program at the time 50 years ago, but it happened to be mostly ships, because that's all we knew to do in marine science. But now we are much more sophisticated, so I hope that new program will take advantage of the new tools, of the new understanding of the ocean, and we're going to come back to your part of the world and help you in understanding the ocean, and also what it does for you as a coastal community.
And one other follow-up question. You know that if you look at the IMBR website and look at the cyber program, one of the people that authored that is here, Waji Nadvi from Goa. You know, that's a planning a program in the Indian Ocean with observing systems. People from Perth, the University of Western Australia, are on the planning committee. So that's another thing that would involve that region of the world.
Same thing.
Before I take the next...
Thank you. So particularly in parts of the world, like Bay of Bengal in particular, there was a problem that particularly that if you want to do something effectively, if there is any maritime dispute between the countries, you can't plan. Recently, the dispute settled between Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar. So it has opened the door to do something in a sustainable and integrated manner. So there are some initiatives, just probably that it might give us some sort of opportunity to explore that issue further and involving international community and those who have expertise in that area, so we can take it further. But that's the, I think, good starting would be in this particular context. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Before I take the next question, I'd just like to go back to Jake's comment, and I wanted to give Liana a bit of time to just think about this concept of how to integrate the changes of values and choices that need to be made into international programming. It's quite a complex question, so I thought there was needed a bit of time to just mull over it.
Yeah, thank you, Jake, for that thought-provoking question. I think on the issue of values, you are right. It's probably a generational thing, and probably one of the few things that are not as fast-paced as the rest of economic activities, so to speak. I think that if models can take into account the impacts of choices on ecosystem services, I think that's one very explicit way to deal with the notion of values as they're translated to choices, as they're translated to ecosystem impacts. I think many economists are already in that field, and I wish there were more, because they're highly nuanced from culture to culture. One of the few things that came up with the discussion here is that if our values on education and capacity building translates to, say, promotion of more STEM programs at the national level, I think that the ocean community at an international scale will be best served. I'll give you the example of Southeast Asia. When I was in high school, there was a STEM program that allowed me to go to the Philippine Science High School. Thereafter, as I continued with my biology program, there was an opportunity opened by the Philippine American Educational Foundation to pursue studies in STEM fields. And so I was able to pursue my PhD in the US on oceanography. But I signed a contract to state that I will go back to my home country to contribute to marine science, and I did for 20 years. So in many ways, this issue of how do you pursue international ocean research the boundaries between global and national blurs, because at the end of the day, it's individuals that make ocean research, but the support of organizations from national, regional, to international is what makes the collective efforts take on emergent properties. So my take in all this is that we have to go at multiple scales. We have to work with multiple organizations. I like diversity. That's part of the resilience of human society. So there may not be a one organization fix all to this. It's probably not going to work anyways. So I think that if conceptually we can work together to make this embracing of the human and natural systems working together, then I think we have a shot, as there are already success stories from Jane's talk to Sam Dupont's plenary today. I think that there are avenues there that just needs to be strengthened and trudged together. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take the next question. Gentleman.
My name is Aliu Agalang from University of Portsmouth. My question was almost preempted by the previous questions and the answers from the panel. So I would like just add to your statement that you mentioned earlier on, Manuel, when you mentioned that most of the global programs that took place were usually like Western based programs. So, and I know there are quite a few programs in the developing countries, like the GEF-funded projects. So my question now is, what is the international global, or what is the international ocean scientific community doing in order to boost the capacity building for those developing countries? Because those programs, the few programs that are existing in that part of the world, are usually being hampered or impeded by lack of capacity. Thank you.
Patricia mentioned already capacity earlier on in one of his answers. Would you like to add some? Yes, Mike?
Since the onset, IMBER has an initiative in capacity building, and they've run summer schools every year. The one upcoming is in Shanghai. They've had them in Turkey and Chile and other places around the world so that it's more accessible. And the topics range from training in using global change data to database management. And I do know that a number of other international programs do have that capacity building aspect. And even for this venue, you know, we had a special fund set aside for capacity building and early career scientist travel. But there need to be more.
Thank you. I've got another question over there.
My name's Richard Feely from NOAA in Seattle, and this question's for Martin Visbeck. At the end of Sam's talk, you asked him a very interesting question about how do we integrate the ocean acidification network into the Global Ocean Observing System. And I want to throw that question a little bit back to you, if I could, to ask you the question, what is your vision of the Global Ocean Observing System under the light of future Earth in a direction towards sustainability?
Wonderful question again, Dick. Thank you for that. And
Martin, can you just hold it a second? I think that Patricia would like to preface that answer.
I think that one issue that we didn't address, I think, is the distinction between a science program and infrastructure for science program. I think these are two different issues, because a science program are ideas, questions, the next vacuum in terms of knowledge. Building infrastructure, like the big accelerator that took 30, 40 years to find the Higgs particle, it's just a case of typically investing large amounts of time in infrastructure. We have been building probably the largest distributed infrastructure in the world through building the goose, but it's not recognized as such. It's put by little pieces, so nobody sees the total cost of running all the satellites that we need to run to do this, and the cost for that. These are billions of dollars. But this is a very large infrastructure. It's not science in that sense. So this is my preface.
Right. Thank you. Martin?
I'm still going to respond, Patricio, because I'm actually agreeing with you on the one hand, but you see, if you want to facilitate discoveries in global science, in particular on challenges that we heard Sam introduce so nicely, some problems that we want to do require a 10, 20, 30-year record of some things to actually answer that scientific question. And there's also scientific discovery that goes along with that. So the question that we're now faced with in ocean science, we have many areas, many disciplinary areas that see the need or the advantage of actually getting these 10, 20, 30-year long records in the name of science first. There's other uses as well. And the first response that scientists do, they say, I have a particular sensor, I know how to do something, and you just take many of those and we're going to get the perfect answer. My answer to that is, that's true, but sometimes it's also helpful to say, well, what platforms, what infrastructure do we already have? And maybe if you partner with existing efforts, the partnership can deliver more in your area, but at the same time promote existing or ongoing areas as well. So that was my question for integration. And on ocean acidification, I think I would use the framework for ocean observing and say, what is the essential ocean variable that you want to solve? Is it pH? Is it the carbon, some carbonate aspects of that? Then what are the sensors? I know Dick has been at the forefront in developing some of those, and once you have these variables and sensors down, then you can engage with the global suite of platforms. Could be Argo floats, could be moored buoys, could be ships, maybe even remote sensing, and in that sense, then you build up an integrated observing system, which is the combination of platforms and sensors, but more importantly, Patricio, it's the data that you generate, how you collect the data and actually provide the information coming out of it. Because in the end, society is paying a lot of money and they want the information. They couldn't care less about Argo floats or ships or other beautiful things. They want information. I think so. Sam again mentioned that, bringing the information together. And here is an area for the ocean community, another infrastructure on the assessment where the climate community has the IPCC. That's an extremely valuable piece of infrastructure to communicate science to policymakers. And the ocean community doesn't have that at that same level of efficiency or visibility. And if we had that, our science, what we do would be more visible, our infrastructure would be more affordable, and we would actually probably be a better source for information for sustainable development goals as well. So the assessment, putting the information together, what is the state of the ocean in a timely, professional, well-endowed way is something that is really lacking. It's infrastructure, I agree, it's not science programming, but it's actually important to elevate science to the next level.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to try to make sure that we can cram in 3 more questions and then reduce the statements from the panel afterwards. I've got one over here. Try to be as quick as you can.
Good morning, I'm Karen Wiltshire. I'm representing POGO and the Alfred Wegener Institute. I'd just like to pick up on Leanne's point, and that is that education is our future. I think we need to go from European-driven education in marine science to Asian and elsewhere-driven education in marine science. And I also would like to just point out that, for example, POGO has a really good program which does capacity building, which is driven like that. And I hope that we manage to get a networking on the level of education in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take this next one over here.
Peter Neal, World Ocean Observatory. The metaphor suggests a ship in tumultuous seas with too many sea anchors to the point where you're going to be regressed to swamping and collapse. So my question to you is this. Sam did it this morning, and he said this is the single most important strategy that we must do, communication, and then he went on to talk about something else. So I'm going to ask each one of you, what is the single, simple thing that you can do that would liberate you from your history and enable the mission that I sense you all aspire to?
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that question for them to answer as part of their final statement. I've got one question at the end over there, which I'm going to try to cram in.
Many thanks. I would like to ask about government paper or leadership in this in research, marine research, because I like to think as hydrographer, because we have IHO working and put tax to each country with national institutions that need to respond because of safety of life at sea and everything. But in oceanography, we don't have some institutions that ask to the government for the responsibilities and put tax and assignate tax in regional areas where we don't have countries that can do hydrography. I would like to think that in the future we will have some kind of government level working on research for the future of humanity, because it's our future. Just that.
Okay, rather than ask the panelists to answer it, I'll just mention that essentially what I think you are saying is that when do we actually coordinate the government's investments rather than the science in itself, but the government's work on the different regions. I'm going to move on to the panelists for the final statements. We have 4 minutes, so that means you can add the maths. You know, it's 101, so it's 1 minute each. To please say your final views of the discussion and pick up any of the questions that you may have heard and you want to pick up again. Start with Martin.
Okay. So I want to make 2 points. First of all, on the communication side, I think communication has as much to do with listening than it has to do with talking. So my aspirational goal for all of us is let's listen to the young voices around the world from all the different cultures and hear them out, what kind of vision they have for ocean science and what vision they have for the future of the ocean in their society. So that's an aspirational goal, I think, for all of us, for me in particular. And if I had one wish right now, I wish we can muster the resources to actually get a proper, well-endowed, well-functioning ocean assessment operational, just like we have as IPCC. I think this would make a world of a difference, and if I had a free wish, that would be my wish.
Thank you, Martin. Liana.
I think partnerships between the scholars of human systems and the scholars of ocean systems needs to be forged more tightly than ever in this generation. I think that in situ capacity building to address those needs to be the main contribution of governments to ocean research.
Thank you, Liana. Mike?
I still think we need the 2 types that programs that were discussed, science about what we don't know. I mean, there may be other things like ocean acidification that pop up that, you know, are focused, coordinated programs to still do the discovery. As you say, 80% of the ocean is not still explored, and we will still learn new things. So I would like to keep that open as an option. And the other are focused programs on what to do about it. We haven't talked about sea level rise, but one could see an international effort, you know, working with different nations on strategies for coastal resilience, and that would be something that would reach out to all countries. There are still the room for these programs like IMBER that have broad goals by geochemical cycles and food webs, but then the overall program with capacity building tries to perform the glue that ties these things together.
Thank you, Mike. Patricio.
To me, I think that the key for many of the questions and the pains that we're suffering today are in institutions. I believe that at the international level we have weakened our ability to coordinate among ourselves, and we have a rather weak institutional system, too distributed in a certain sense. You know, at the end of the Challenger expedition, you know, there were many analyses. Why is it that the Challenger didn't leave any institution in the UK, and the UK had to wait for 60 years to put the institution together to harness the legacy of the Challenger? That's a huge lesson. The USS beat them in 25. The Marine Station in San Diego changed their name to become the Scripps Institution for Oceanography. Scripps wasn't born as Scripps Institution of Oceanography. It was born as a marine station. When they changed the name, the director of Scripps at the time, Dr. Bond, made a survey how many marine stations there were in the world, and there were 255. But there wasn't any single oceanographic institution. So there's a big difference between the two. And when you really are talking of oceanography, you really need to strengthen the institution that can coordinate a very special science that depends a lot on scale and large, deployment of infrastructure and of course, capacity development and all the things that we've been talking about. I think we have weakened our institution. We need to strengthen them back.
Well, thank you very much. I can't help using the privilege of the chair to just make one final comment. There's been a lot of comments about capacity building, and just one thought to take with us to coffee. There's a difference between capacity building understood as training others to do what I do, and capacity building as learning together to do something that we need. And I think that's something that we also need to remember, because it's an evolution that is required. I'd like just to thank everyone, all the members of the panel for their insightful views, and can we have a round of applause for them for the interventions?
Thank you. Thanks to you.
And thank you to the audience for being so engaged with this topic. Very important and very relevant. Thank you very much, everyone. Coffee's outside.
Maybe one point I wanted to comment on.
Manuel,
Not really. We have
In our
guests.
National Science
Yes.
Foundation,
Yeah.
it used to be for basic research, it was 70% of the funding, and supporting the ships, 30%. And closer. This is the first year that the support of infrastructure will be more than they could afford for research. And they're
Excuse
still
me, we
hanging
have
all
some
the numbers.
announcements.
Satellite ships, this OOI, the observing system.
So, first of all, just to remind you that today